A billionaire fired his maid on Christmas Eve. She was the mother he abandoned 40 years ago. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from right now. Drop your city and country in the comments below. It's incredible to see our Deep Stories family growing across the globe. If you believe that it's never too late for forgiveness, that family bonds can survive decades of separation, and that sometimes the people we've been searching for are closer than we ever imagined, hit that subscribe button right now. This is Derek Whitmore and Margaret Williams' story, a tale of abandonment, hidden identity, terminal illness, and discovering that love can bridge even the deepest wounds if we're brave enough to let it. Let's begin. Derek Whitmore had built his empire on precision, control, and an absolute intolerance for mistakes. At 58, he was worth $2.4 billion as the founder and CEO of Whitmore Technologies, one of Silicon Valley's most successful software companies, tall and imposing with silver hair perfectly styled, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that commanded immediate respect and intimidation in equal measure. He wore custom Italian suits that cost more than most people earned in 6 months, drove a different luxury car depending on his mood, and lived in a sprawling estate in the hills overlooking San Francisco Bay that had appeared in Architectural Digest twice. Derek's Christmas Eve gala was legendary in Bay Area social circles. Every year on December 24th, he hosted 300 of the most influential people in tech, finance, and politics for an evening of champagne, caviar, and networking disguised as holiday celebration. The event required months of planning, cost upward of $500,000, and served as both Derek's annual demonstration of his wealth and status and his opportunity to solidify business relationships that would benefit him in the coming year. Everything had to be perfect. Absolutely everything. Derek accepted nothing less than flawless execution from everyone involved. The estate's staff had been preparing for weeks. Decorators had transformed the mansion into a winter wonderland with thousands of white lights, massive floral arrangements in silver and gold, and a 20-foot Christmas tree in the main hall decorated with custom crystal ornaments that had cost $12,000. Each ornament was unique, hand-blown by a renowned Austrian artist, irreplaceable. The tree was Derek's pride, the centerpiece of the entire event, photographed every year for Society magazines. Margaret Williams, who went by Maggie, had been working as part of Derek's household cleaning staff for exactly 6 months. At 78 years old, she was small and frail-looking, with white hair pulled back in a simple bun, weathered hands that showed decades of hard labor, and warm brown eyes that held both deep sadness and persistent hope. She moved slowly but thoroughly, cleaning with meticulous attention to detail. The housekeeping supervisor had hired her despite her age because she was reliable, never complained, and did excellent work. Maggie always arrived early, stayed late if needed, and never asked for special treatment despite her obvious physical limitations. What no one on Derek's staff knew, what Derek himself had no idea about, was that Maggie had spent the last 3 years searching for him. She'd hired a private investigator with money saved from decades of cleaning houses, tracked down adoption records that had been sealed for 40 years, navigated bureaucratic obstacles and legal barriers, and finally found him. Derek Whitmore, tech billionaire, was the baby boy she'd left at St. Mary's Orphanage in Oakland 40 years ago when he was 3 years old, and she was a desperate 20-year-old girl with no money, no family support, and no options she could see. Getting hired as part of his cleaning staff had been Maggie's plan. She couldn't just show up at his door and announce who she was. What would she say? "Hello, I'm the mother who abandoned you 4 decades ago, left you in an orphanage and never came back like I promised." She had no right to disrupt his life, no claim to his attention or affection, but she was dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the doctor had told her 8 months ago. Maybe 6 months left, maybe a year if she was lucky and the treatment worked. She didn't have time for careful planning or gradual approaches. She needed to see him, to be near him, to know what kind of man her baby boy had become before she died. So she'd applied for the housekeeping position under her married name, Williams, hoping he wouldn't make any connection to her maiden name of Chen that appeared on his original birth certificate, assuming he'd ever even seen it. For 6 months, Maggie had cleaned Derek's home twice a week. She'd walked through rooms he lived in, touched furniture he used, organized closets full of his expensive clothes. She'd studied family photographs on his walls and mantel, learning about the life he'd built. He'd married, had 3 children who were now adults themselves, had grandchildren she would never know. He'd succeeded beyond anything she could have imagined for the scared little boy she'd left behind. Every time she saw him, usually just briefly as he passed through rooms she was cleaning, her heart broke and healed simultaneously. He was alive. He was healthy. He was successful. He'd survived her abandonment and thrived. But he had no idea who she was, no recognition in his eyes when he looked past her the way wealthy people looked past domestic workers. The day before Christmas Eve, as preparations for the gala reached their peak intensity, Derek was in a particularly foul mood. A major business deal had fallen through that morning. His ex-wife had called demanding he increase his already generous alimony payments. His oldest son had announced he was dropping out of business school to pursue art, which Derek considered a catastrophic waste of potential and money. He'd been short-tempered with everyone all day, snapping at his assistant, berating the catering staff, criticizing the decorators' choices. Maggie was cleaning the main hall, carefully dusting around the base of the enormous Christmas tree, when her hand trembled. She'd been feeling weaker lately, the cancer progressing despite aggressive treatment. The trembling in her hands had gotten worse in recent weeks. She reached out to steady herself against the tree, just for a moment, just to catch her balance. But her hand caught one of the lower branches, and everything happened in horrible slow motion. The branch shifted. An ornament tilted. The delicate crystal sphere, one of the custom Austrian pieces, slipped from its hook and fell. Maggie lunged to catch it, but her aged reflexes were too slow. The ornament hit the marble floor and shattered into hundreds of glittering fragments, the sound echoing through the vast hall like a gunshot. Derek heard the crash from his office. He came striding into the hall within seconds, his face already dark with anger before he even saw what had happened. When he saw the shattered ornament, saw Maggie standing frozen with her hand still extended, his expression transformed into something beyond ordinary anger, into genuine rage. "What did you do?" His voice was cold and controlled, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted, "Do you have any idea what that was?" Maggie's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. It was an accident. I lost my balance and—" "I don't care if it was an accident." Derek cut her off sharply. "That ornament cost $12,000. $12,000, and it's irreplaceable. The artist who made them died 2 years ago. Every single piece was unique, and you just destroyed one of them through sheer carelessness the day before my most important event of the year." By this point, other staff members had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. The housekeeper supervisor, the catering manager, several of the decorating crew, everyone watching, everyone seeing Maggie's humiliation. Derek continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're fired. Effective immediately. I want you out of my house within the hour. Don't even think about asking for a reference. In fact, I'm calling the staffing agency to make sure they never send you anywhere else. You clearly can't be trusted around valuable items." Maggie felt tears starting, but blinked them back. "Please, Mr. Whitmore," she started, her voice shaking. "I've worked here for 6 months without any problems. This was the first—" "The first? The first?" Derek's voice rose. "Do you think that matters? Do you think I care that this is your first catastrophic mistake? One mistake is all it takes to ruin something irreplaceable, just like it only takes one moment of carelessness to destroy years of careful planning. You're done. Get out. It's Christmas Eve tomorrow, Maggie said quietly, hating herself for begging but unable to stop. Please don't fire me on Christmas Eve. Derek's eyes were absolutely cold. That's not my problem. You should have thought about that before you destroyed my property. Merry Christmas. You're fired. He turned and walked out of the hall, leaving Maggie standing among the shattered glass, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. The housekeeper supervisor approached her with genuine sympathy in her eyes. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'll help you get your things. There's nothing I can do when he's made up his mind like this. Maggie nodded silently, not trusting herself to speak. She collected her few personal items from the staff locker room, changed out of her uniform for the last time, and left Derek Whitmore's estate, knowing she would never return, knowing she'd wasted her last months alive on a plan that had failed completely. She'd been so close to him, in his home, part of his daily life even if he never really saw her. And now she'd lost even that small connection. She would die without him ever knowing who she was. But Maggie had made preparations for this possibility. 3 weeks earlier, after a particularly difficult round of chemotherapy left her weak and terrified she might not have much time left, she'd met with her attorney and given him specific instructions. If anything happened to her, if she died or became too ill to communicate, he was to deliver a sealed envelope to Derek Whitmore containing a letter she'd written and a DNA test result confirming their biological relationship. She'd had the DNA test done secretly, using hair she'd collected from Derek's hairbrush while cleaning his bathroom, comparing it to her own sample. The results had been scientifically definitive. Derek Whitmore was her biological son. She'd carried that proof for weeks, unable to decide whether to show him, terrified of his reaction, hoping to find the perfect moment that never came. Now, fired and banished from his home, Maggie made a decision. She called her attorney from her car in Derek's driveway before she even left the property. Alan, it's Maggie Williams. Remember the envelope I left with you? The one for Derek Whitmore. I need you to deliver it today. Right now, if possible. Don't wait until I die. I don't have time to wait anymore. The attorney tried to talk her out of it, suggested she think about it more carefully, warned her that delivering such shocking news might not go well, but Maggie was insistent. He just fired me on Christmas Eve. He'll never see me again voluntarily. This is my last chance for him to know the truth. Please, Alan, do this for me. Today. The attorney agreed reluctantly. He would drive to Derek's estate that evening and deliver the envelope personally, requesting that Derek read it immediately as it contained time-sensitive information. Derek's Christmas Eve gala was proceeding flawlessly. 300 guests in elegant attire, champagne flowing, a string quartet playing in the main hall, catering staff circulating with elaborate hors d'oeuvres. Derek moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and congratulations, discussing business opportunities and political connections, playing the gracious host while internally calculating which conversations would prove most valuable to his interests. The shattered ornament had been cleaned up, the tree rearranged slightly to hide the gap. Most guests wouldn't even notice one missing decoration among hundreds. At 8:30 p.m., just as dinner was about to be served, Derek's head of security approached him discreetly. Sir, there's an attorney at the gate requesting to see you urgently. Says he has time-sensitive legal documents that require your immediate personal attention. He won't leave them with me. Says they must be delivered directly to you and that you'll want to read them right away. Derek was irritated at the interruption, but also curious. What kind of legal matter would require delivery during his Christmas Eve gala? Can't it wait until tomorrow? He says no, sir. Says it's regarding a matter you're unaware of, and that waiting could have serious consequences. Derek excused himself from the conversation he'd been having and stepped into his private office, instructing security to send the attorney in. The man who entered was older, probably in his mid-60s, wearing a neat but inexpensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Alan Morrison, attorney at law, representing a client who wished to remain anonymous for the moment. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for the intrusion during your event. I wouldn't be here if my client didn't believe this was genuinely urgent. She asked me to deliver this envelope to you personally and to request that you read its contents immediately, in private. The matter is of an extremely personal and sensitive nature. Derek took the envelope, noting it was sealed with his name written on the front in shaky handwriting. "Who is your client? She'll be identified in the letter," the attorney said carefully. "I should mention that I've advised her against this approach, that I believe there are better ways to communicate what she needs to tell you. But she insists this is her only option given her circumstances. Please read the letter, Mr. Whitmore. All of it. And when you're ready to discuss it, my contact information is inside." The attorney left quickly, and Derek was alone in his office holding the mysterious envelope. He considered putting it aside, returning to his party, dealing with whatever this was tomorrow, but curiosity won out. He opened the envelope and found two items inside, a multi-page letter written in that same shaky handwriting, and an official-looking document from a DNA testing laboratory. Derek's eyes went immediately to the DNA report. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. A paternity test result, except not paternity, but maternity, showing that he, Derek Jonathan Whitmore, born Derek Chen at St. Mary's Hospital in Oakland on March 15, 1965, shared a 99.97% DNA match with Margaret Ann Chen Williams, indicating with scientific certainty that she was his biological mother. Derek felt something cold settle in his chest as his mind tried to process this information. Margaret Chen Williams. He didn't know anyone by that name. Why would someone be running DNA tests claiming to be his biological mother? He'd never known his biological parents. He'd been adopted from St. Mary's Orphanage when he was 5 years old by Thomas and Patricia Whitmore, had taken their name, had always known he was adopted, but had never been particularly interested in searching for his birth family. He'd had good adoptive parents who'd loved him and supported him. The people who'd given him up were irrelevant to his life. With hands that weren't quite steady, Derek unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Derek, my name is Margaret Williams, though you knew me as Maggie. I'm the woman you fired this afternoon for breaking your Christmas ornament. I'm also the woman who left you at St. Mary's Orphanage 40 years ago when you were 3 years old, and I was 20 and more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. I don't expect you to forgive me for what I did. I don't expect you to understand or to want anything to do with me. I'm writing this letter because I'm dying, pancreatic cancer, maybe 3 months left if I'm lucky, and I need you to know the truth before I go. You deserve to know where you came from and why I made the choice that I've regretted every single day for 4 decades. Your father's name was Robert Chen. We met when I was 19, working as a waitress at a restaurant in Chinatown. He was charming and handsome and told me he loved me. I was young and stupid and believed him. When I got pregnant, he disappeared, just vanished. I never saw him again. I was alone. Derek. Completely alone. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 17. I had no siblings, no extended family who wanted anything to do with me. I was working 2 jobs just to afford a tiny apartment and barely surviving. When you were born, I tried so hard to make it work. I loved you so much. You were this perfect, beautiful baby boy with bright eyes and the sweetest smile. But I couldn't afford childcare and I couldn't afford to stop working and everything was falling apart. When you were 3, I lost my second job because I had to bring you with me and you were too disruptive. My landlord was threatening to evict us because I was 2 months behind on rent. I had $17 in my bank account and no food in the apartment. I was terrified. Not for me, I could have survived somehow, but for you. You deserved better than a mother who couldn't feed you properly or keep a roof over your head or provide any kind of stable life. So I took you to St. Mary's Orphanage. I told them I would come back for you in a few weeks, just as soon as I got back on my feet financially. I promised you I would come back. I remember you looking at me with those trusting eyes and saying, "Okay, Mommy, see you soon." And I walked away from the most precious thing in my life. I meant to come back. I swear to you, I meant to keep my promise. But weeks turned into months, and I was working 3 jobs trying to save money, and I kept telling myself I'd come back when I had enough saved to provide for you properly. Then I heard through a social worker I'd contacted that you'd been adopted by a good family, the Whitmores. They could give you everything I couldn't. A stable home, 2 parents, financial security, education, a real future, and I convinced myself that you were better off without me, that disturbing your new life would be selfish, that the kindest thing I could do was stay away and let you thrive with parents who could actually take care of you properly. So I didn't come back. I let you go. I let the Whitmores give you the life I never could have provided. But I never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped wondering what you looked like or what kind of person you were becoming or if you were happy. I kept the only photo I had of you, a picture from your 2nd birthday, and looked at it every single day. I imagined what you might be doing, hoped you were healthy and loved and successful. 3 years ago, after my husband died and I was alone again, I decided I needed to find you before I died, just to see you, even from a distance, just to know you'd turned out okay. I hired a private investigator, and after months of searching, he found you, Derek Whitmore, billionaire tech CEO, living in San Francisco, successful beyond anything I could have imagined. I was so proud and so heartbroken at the same time. I got cancer 6 months after finding you. The doctor said it was aggressive, that I probably had less than a year. I couldn't die without seeing you, without being near you, even if you never knew who I was. So I got myself hired as part of your cleaning staff. I know it was manipulative. I know I had no right to insert myself into your life without your knowledge or consent. But I was desperate and dying, and I just wanted to be in the same space as my son, even as the invisible old woman who cleaned his house. For 6 months, I watched you from the margins of your life. I saw what an incredible person you've become, brilliant and driven and successful. You built an empire from nothing, achieved things I could never have dreamed possible. Part of me wants to believe that my choice to let you be adopted was the right one, that you became this extraordinary person because the Whitmores could give you opportunities I never could have provided. But I also saw your loneliness, Derek. I saw how you keep everyone at a distance, how you measure every relationship by its utility, how you treat people, including your own children, with that same cold calculation you probably use in business. I saw the emptiness behind your success. And I wondered if maybe my abandonment damaged you in ways that all the money and achievement in the world couldn't heal. When you fired me today for breaking that ornament, when you spoke to me with such contempt on Christmas Eve without a moment of compassion or understanding, I realized that you might never have the capacity to forgive me or accept me, even if you knew who I was. And maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe that's justice for what I did to you 40 years ago. But here's what I need you to know. I loved you then, and I love you now. You were not unwanted or unloved. You were the most precious thing in my life, and giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought I was doing what was best for you. Whether I was right or wrong, whether you can ever forgive me or not, I need you to know that you mattered to me, that you always mattered. The DNA test enclosed proves I'm telling you the truth. I had it done without your knowledge, using samples I collected while cleaning your home. I know that was a violation of your privacy, and I apologize. But I needed you to have proof so you wouldn't think this was some scam or delusion. I'm not asking for anything from you, Derek. I don't want your money or your time or your forgiveness. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know where you came from, and because I don't want to die with this secret. What you do with this information is completely up to you. If you want to pretend you never received this letter, I'll understand. If you want to have your lawyers contact mine with a cease and desist order, that's your right. I won't contact you again unless you reach out first. But if there's any part of you that wants to know more, that has questions about your early childhood or your father or your biological family history, I'll be at Oakland General Hospital receiving treatment until I'm too sick to continue. After that, I'll be at 47 Maple Street, apartment 3B in Oakland. I don't know how much time I have left. Could be weeks, could be a few months, but whatever time remains, I'll spend it hoping that maybe, possibly, you might be willing to see me once before the end. I'm sorry for everything, Derek. I'm sorry for abandoning you. I'm sorry for sneaking into your life under false pretenses. I'm sorry for breaking your ornament and causing a scene at your event. I'm sorry for burdening you with this truth during the holidays. I'm sorry for all of it, but I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for the 3 years I had with you before I lost you. And I'm not sorry for the 6 months I got to be near you again, even if you never knew who I was. You were a beautiful baby. You're an extraordinary man. And no matter what happens next, I'll die knowing that my son survived and succeeded and built an incredible life for himself. Merry Christmas. Derek. Your mother, Margaret Williams. Derek read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing details he'd missed before. His hands were shaking by the time he finished. His mind was racing, processing, rejecting, accepting, cycling through emotions faster than he could identify them. Shock, anger, confusion, something that might be grief or might be relief or might be rage, he couldn't tell. The woman he'd fired this afternoon, the old cleaning lady who'd broken his ornament. That was his biological mother. She'd been in his house twice a week for 6 months. And he'd never really looked at her, never seen her as anything more than part of the domestic staff, invisible and irrelevant to his life. Derek stood abruptly, paced his office, sat again, stood again. His gala was happening without him just beyond the office door, 300 people expecting him to play the gracious host. Business deals to be made, connections to be solidified. But all of that felt surreal and distant compared to the bomb that had just exploded in his carefully ordered world. He thought about the woman he'd fired, tried to picture her face clearly, small, elderly, white hair, stooped posture. She'd looked tired and sad when he'd verbally eviscerated her in front of the entire staff. He'd felt absolutely justified in his anger about the broken ornament. It had been expensive and irreplaceable, and her carelessness had damaged his property. Her circumstances weren't his concern. Mistakes had consequences. Except now he knew those circumstances. She was 78 years old. She was dying of cancer. She'd spent 6 months working in his home just to be near him because she was his mother who'd abandoned him decades ago out of desperation and poverty and misguided belief that he'd be better off without her. Derek felt something break in his chest, some carefully constructed wall he'd built around his emotions. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time in more years than he could remember, he started to cry. Not polite tears, but actual sobbing, grief and anger and loss and longing all tangled together into something overwhelming. His assistant knocked on the door tentatively. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Sir, dinner is ready to be served. Everyone's wondering where you are. Tell them I'm dealing with an emergency," Derek managed to say with relative composure. "Make my apologies. Ask my brother-in-law to give the dinner toast in my place. I can't come out right now. Is everything all right, sir?" "No," Derek said honestly. "No, everything is not all right. But I'll handle it." He heard his assistant's footsteps retreat. The party would continue without him. It would probably be fine. People would gossip about his mysterious emergency, but they'd eat his expensive food and drink his expensive champagne and network with each other, and the evening would be remembered as a success regardless of his absence. None of it mattered. Not really. Not compared to what he needed to do right now. Derek looked at the letter again, at the address Maggie had provided. Oakland General Hospital, receiving treatment until she was too sick to continue. He looked at his watch. 8:45 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Visiting hours at the hospital would be over soon. She probably wasn't even there tonight. But he needed to know, needed to try. He stood decisively, grabbed his coat and headed for his private garage, ignoring the sounds of his gala happening in the main house. His driver was nowhere to be found, probably eating with the catering staff, so Derek got into his own car and drove himself, something he rarely did anymore. The route to Oakland took him 40 minutes in light traffic, the city decorated with Christmas lights, people heading home from late shopping or early church services. Oakland General Hospital looked tired and underfunded compared to the sleek private medical centers Derek was accustomed to. He parked in the visitor lot and went inside, approaching the main desk. "I'm looking for a patient. Margaret Williams. I'm her son." The receptionist checked her computer. "She's in the oncology ward, 4th floor, but visiting hours ended at 8 p.m. You'll need to come back tomorrow." "This can't wait until tomorrow," Derek said, and something in his voice or his expression made the receptionist pause. She studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Room 412. Take the elevator to the 4th floor. Turn right. But if a nurse stops you, I didn't tell you that." Derek took the elevator up, his heart pounding. The oncology ward was quiet, dim lights in the hallway, most room doors closed. He found room 412 and stood outside it for a long moment, trying to find courage or clarity or something. Then he pushed the door open quietly. The room was small and sterile, machines beeping softly, the smell of antiseptic and illness. In the bed, looking even smaller and more frail than she had that afternoon, was Maggie Williams. She was asleep or unconscious, an IV running into her thin arm, oxygen tubes in her nose. Her face was gaunt, her skin almost translucent. She looked ancient and exhausted and very, very sick. Derek approached the bed slowly, studying her face, looking for any resemblance to himself or any memory from his earliest childhood. He couldn't remember her. His memories began with the Whitmores, with the adoptive family who'd raised him. Everything before age 5 was blank or fragmentary at best, but looking at her now, he saw something in the shape of her eyes or the line of her jaw that might be familiar. Or maybe he was imagining it. Maybe he wanted to see a connection that wasn't really there. He sat in the chair beside her bed and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for exactly. For her to wake up, for some revelation or understanding to strike him, for his anger or his grief or his confusion to resolve into something clear. Maggie stirred about 20 minutes later, her eyes opening slowly, unfocused at first. Then she saw him sitting there and her expression shifted through several emotions very quickly. Surprise, fear, hope, resignation. "Derek," she whispered, her voice weak. "You came. I didn't think you would come. I read your letter," Derek said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough with emotion. "The DNA test. All of it. I'm sorry," Maggie said immediately. "I'm so sorry for all of it. For leaving you, for lying about who I was, for disrupting your life with this information. You have every right to hate me." "I don't know what I feel," Derek said honestly. "I don't know if I hate you or if I'm angry or if I'm relieved or what. I just know I needed to see you. I needed to ask you if it was true. If you really are my mother." "I am," Maggie said softly. "I gave birth to you 40 years ago and I loved you more than anything in the world, and I made the worst mistake of my life when I left you at that orphanage. I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I was young and scared and maybe I was wrong. I don't know. All I know is that I've regretted it every single day since." They sat in silence for several minutes. Then Derek asked the question that had been burning in his mind since he read the letter. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? 6 months you worked in my house. 6 months you had opportunities to say something. Why hide?" Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Because I had no right to disrupt your life. You had built something incredible without me. You had a family and a career and a life where I was completely irrelevant. What was I supposed to say? Hello, I'm the mother who abandoned you 40 years ago. Surprise. You would have thrown me out immediately, and you would have been justified. At least as your cleaning lady, I could be near you, could see you, could know you were okay. It was selfish, but it was all I had. You were dying, Derek said. You're dying. Why not tell me before it was too late? I was going to, Maggie said. I kept telling myself I'd find the right moment, the right words. But every time I tried to imagine that conversation, I couldn't see it going well. You don't seem like someone who would want a dying mother showing up asking for forgiveness and a deathbed reconciliation. You seem like someone who keeps people at a distance and doesn't let emotion interfere with logic. I thought you'd reject me, and then I'd have to live my last months knowing my son wanted nothing to do with me. This way, at least I could pretend that maybe if you'd known, maybe you would have cared. Derek felt more tears coming and didn't try to stop them this time. So you were just going to die without me ever knowing? Without giving me a choice about whether I wanted to know you? Yes, Maggie admitted. That was my plan. Let you live your life without the burden of me. But then you fired me and I realized I was out of time, that I'd never see you again, and I couldn't bear the thought of dying with you never knowing the truth. So I had my attorney deliver the letter. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. Derek reached out slowly and took her hand. It was small and cold and fragile in his bones and thin skin. No strength left. Tell me about him, he said. My father, Robert Chen. Who was he? Maggie's expression softened with memory. He was beautiful and charming and completely irresponsible. He told me he loved me, but he didn't mean it. Or he meant it in the moment, but didn't mean it in any lasting way. When I told him I was pregnant, he said all the right things at first, said we'd figure it out together. Then 2 days later he was gone, left town, left me, vanished completely. I tried to find him, but he didn't want to be found. Do I look like him? Derek asked. Yes, Maggie said. You have his eyes, his jawline, his height. Looking at you is like seeing a ghost of him, except you're so much more than he ever was. You're successful and driven and brilliant. He was charming but aimless. You became everything he could have been if he'd had any discipline or ambition. They talked through the night, past midnight into Christmas morning. Maggie told him stories about his early childhood, memories she'd held on to for 40 years. His favorite stuffed animal, a worn blue elephant he carried everywhere, the way he'd laughed when she made funny faces, how he'd been afraid of thunderstorms and would climb into her bed seeking comfort. His first words, his favorite foods, his personality as a toddler, curious and fearless and affectionate. Derek listened, trying to connect these stories to any memories of his own and failing. That child she described felt like a stranger, not him. But he wanted to hear it all anyway, wanted to know where he came from even if he couldn't remember it directly. He asked about the Whitmores, whether she knew anything about the family who'd adopted him. Maggie told him she'd followed his life from a distance, reading newspaper articles about his adoptive father's law practice, finding announcements of family milestones. She knew the Whitmores had been good to him, had given him opportunities and education and love. She was grateful to them for that, even as it broke her heart that they'd gotten to raise her son when she couldn't. Why didn't you ever try to contact me after I was grown? Derek asked. I've been an adult for decades. You could have found me any time. I was ashamed, Maggie said simply, and afraid. What if you hated me? What if knowing the truth about your abandonment just caused you pain? I convinced myself that leaving you alone was kinder than showing up and demanding forgiveness I didn't deserve. I see now that was cowardly, that you deserved the choice of whether to know me or not. But at the time, it seemed like the kindest option. As dawn approached, Derek made a decision. You're not staying here, he said. You're coming home with me. Maggie looked startled. Derek, no, you don't owe me anything. I'm fine here. I have my own apartment and... You're dying, Derek interrupted. You just said you have maybe 3 months left. You're spending those months in a hospital or in some apartment alone? No. You're coming to my house. I have 22 rooms. You can have your own suite, your own privacy. I'll hire private nurses if you need them. You're going to spend whatever time you have left as my mother, not as some stranger dying alone. Tears streamed down Maggie's face. Derek, you don't have to do this. I don't deserve this kind of kindness from you. Maybe not, Derek said. I don't know. I don't know what you deserve or what I owe you or how I'm supposed to feel about any of this. But I know that you're my mother and you're dying, and I have the resources to make your last months comfortable. So that's what I'm going to do. We'll figure out the rest as we go. 3 days later, after Derek had made all the necessary arrangements with the hospital and his household staff, Maggie moved into a guest suite in his mansion. Derek explained her presence to his children simply, "This is your grandmother, my biological mother. She's going to be living here for a while." The children, all adults in their 20s and 30s, were shocked and confused and full of questions Derek couldn't fully answer yet. But they were kind to Maggie, welcoming her tentatively, trying to process this sudden expansion of their family. The weeks that followed were strange and difficult and unexpectedly healing. Maggie was weak from her treatment and the cancer, spending most of her time resting in her room. But when she had energy, Derek would visit and they would talk, sometimes about the past, filling in gaps in his history, helping him understand where he came from, sometimes about the present, his life and struggles and relationships. Maggie was surprisingly insightful, gently pointing out patterns Derek had never noticed in his own behavior, ways his fear of abandonment had shaped how he kept people at emotional distance. "You're afraid to need anyone," she told him one afternoon as they sat together in her room. "You're afraid that if you depend on people, they'll leave like I left you. So you keep everyone at arm's length. Your children, your employees, everyone. You measure relationships by utility instead of connection because connection feels dangerous." Derek wanted to deny it but couldn't. "You're right," he admitted. "I never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. I don't let people close. I don't trust that they'll stay." "I'm so sorry I did that to you," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "I gave you that wound and you've spent your whole life protecting yourself from being hurt that way again. That's on me. That's my failure as a mother." Derek took her hand. "But you came back. You found me. Even knowing I might reject you. Even dying. You came back. That has to count for something. Does it?" Maggie asked. "Or did I just make everything worse by disrupting your life when you were fine without me?" "I don't know if I was fine," Derek said slowly. "I was successful. Yes, but fine. I'm not sure I know what that means anymore." Maggie declined steadily over the following weeks. The cancer was aggressive and resistant to treatment. By mid-January, she was bedridden, too weak to leave her room. Derek hired the best hospice nurses money could buy, made sure she had whatever medication she needed to stay comfortable, sat with her for hours every day just being present. His children came to know her in those final weeks, asking her questions about her life, about Derek's early childhood, about her regrets and her joys. She told them stories, apologized for not being part of their lives, expressed pride in how they'd all turned out. They called her Grandma Maggie and brought her flowers and read to her when she was too tired to talk. On February 3rd, 63 days after Derek had first shown up at her hospital room on Christmas Eve, Maggie died peacefully in her sleep, with Derek sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. He'd been there for most of the previous 48 hours, knowing the end was close, wanting to make sure she wasn't alone when it came. The funeral was small but meaningful. Derek's children attended, some staff members who'd gotten to know Maggie during her time in the house, and the attorney who'd delivered that life-changing letter. Derek gave a eulogy that was honest about the complexity of their relationship, the pain of abandonment and the grace of reconciliation. The way 63 days at the end of her life had somehow healed 40 years of absence. In the months that followed, Derek found himself changing in ways he couldn't have predicted. He started reaching out to his children more, having actual conversations instead of transactional interactions. He apologized to them for his emotional distance, explaining what Maggie had helped him understand about his fear of connection and commitment. The relationships didn't transform overnight, but they began to shift towards something more genuine and less guarded. He thought often about what Maggie had told him in one of their last conversations. The people we overlook are sometimes the ones who matter most. I was invisible to you for 6 months, and I was your mother. How many other people do you walk past every day without really seeing them? How many opportunities for connection are you missing because you've categorized people as unimportant based on their job or their status? Derek started noticing his staff in ways he never had before, learning their names, asking about their families, treating them as humans instead of functions. It felt awkward at first, performing kindness mechanically because Maggie's words had made him conscious of his previous coldness. But gradually it became more natural, more genuine. He established the Margaret Williams Memorial Foundation, using $5 million from his personal wealth to fund programs supporting single mothers in crisis, providing resources and assistance so they wouldn't face the impossible choices Maggie had faced 40 years earlier. The foundation offered child care assistance, job training, temporary housing, financial planning, legal aid, whatever was needed to help mothers keep their children instead of giving them up out of desperation. The foundation's mission statement, which Derek wrote himself, read, "My mother loved me enough to let me go when she thought that was best for me. This foundation exists to make sure other mothers never have to make that choice. Every mother deserves the support and resources necessary to raise her children. Every child deserves to grow up knowing they were wanted and loved. This is Margaret Williams's legacy." 5 years after Maggie's death, Derek stood at her grave on what would have been her 83rd birthday, placing flowers on the headstone that read, "Margaret Ann Williams, beloved mother." She came back. His oldest daughter was with him, pregnant with her first child, his first grandchild. "She was brave," his daughter said, looking at the grave, "to show up at your house after 40 years, knowing you might reject her. That took courage I'm not sure I could have found." "She was terrified," Derek said. "In those last weeks, she told me how scared she was that I would hate her, that I wouldn't forgive her. But she did it anyway because she couldn't die with me not knowing the truth." "Do you forgive her?" his daughter asked. "For leaving you?" Derek thought about that carefully before answering. "Yes, I do. Not immediately, not easily. But over time, hearing her story, understanding her desperation, seeing her regret, yes, I forgive her. She made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. She did the best she could with what she knew at the time. And she spent 40 years carrying the weight of that choice, never forgiving herself even when I eventually did." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while. Then Derek said, "She taught me something important in those 63 days, that success without connection is empty, that people we overlook or dismiss often carry entire worlds of experience and pain and love that we'll never know if we don't take time to actually see them, that it's never too late to forgive, to change, to choose compassion over judgment. That family isn't just the people who've always been there, but also the people we find along the way, the connections we choose to honor even when they're complicated." His daughter squeezed his hand. "I'm glad she came back. I'm glad you got those days with her. I'm glad you're telling me all this because it helps me understand you better." Derek smiled. "Me too. I wish I'd had more time with her. I wish I'd known her when I was growing up. But I'm grateful for what we did have. 63 days of truth and connection and love. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And it was more than I had on Christmas Eve before she sent me that letter. This is their story, the story of Margaret Williams, who made an impossible choice 40 years ago and spent the rest of her life carrying that weight until she found the courage to come back. The story of Derek Whitmore, who thought success meant never needing anyone until he discovered that the invisible cleaning lady was his mother. A story about abandonment and forgiveness, about seeing people we've overlooked, about choosing compassion even when anger feels justified, about discovering that family can be found even in the most unlikely ways, and that it's never too late for love if we're brave enough to accept it. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories about extraordinary, ordinary people, and let us know in the comments which moment moved you most. Tell someone about Margaret and Derek. Let their story remind us all that the people we dismiss might be the ones we need most, that mistakes don't define us forever if we find the courage to seek redemption, that forgiveness is possible even after decades of pain, that family isn't just about biology, but about the connections we choose to honor, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the people we've been overlooking all along. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for believing in second chances and the possibility that broken relationships can heal if we're willing to do the hard work of forgiveness. Until next time, remember, you're never too lost to come home. It's never too late to seek forgiveness. And sometimes the person you've been searching for has been right in front of you all along, waiting for you to really see them. True family is measured not in years together, but in moments of genuine connection. And 63 days of truth and love can heal 40 years of absence if we're brave enough to let it. The impact of Derek and Margaret's story extended far beyond their personal relationship. When local media picked up on the story of the billionaire CEO and his biological mother, the one he'd unknowingly fired on Christmas Eve before discovering her identity, it captured public attention in ways neither of them had anticipated. A San Francisco Chronicle reporter wrote a feature article titled, "The Christmas Miracle That Almost Wasn't," detailing their reunion and Margaret's final months in Derek's home. The article resonated with readers across the country. People wrote letters to the Chronicle sharing their own stories of family separation, adoption, reconciliation attempted and achieved or painfully failed. The comment section filled with thousands of responses. People debating whether Margaret had made the right choice 40 years ago, whether Derek's forgiveness was earned or naive, whether family obligations survived decades of absence. Some readers were critical of Margaret, arguing that no circumstance justified abandoning a 3-year-old child, that poverty and fear weren't adequate excuses for giving up on motherhood. Others defended her passionately, pointing out the systemic failures that force impossible choices on single mothers, the lack of support systems that might have allowed her to keep Derek, the courage it took to prioritize his well-being over her desire to keep him, even when it meant losing him forever. Derek read some of these responses and found himself understanding his mother more deeply through other people's perspectives. He hadn't fully grasped how much society had failed her, how different things might have been if she'd had access to child care assistance or housing support or any of the safety nets that simply didn't exist in the 1970s for poor single mothers. Her choice had been between keeping Derek in poverty with no stability or giving him a chance at a better life. That wasn't really a choice at all. He thought about this often as he developed the Maggie Williams Memorial Foundation's programs. The goal wasn't just to provide financial assistance, though that was certainly part of it. The goal was to create the support systems Margaret had lacked, to make sure no mother faced the same impossible decision between keeping her child in desperate circumstances or giving them up in hopes someone else could provide better. The foundation started with basic services, emergency financial assistance for rent and utilities, connections to existing welfare programs that many mothers didn't know how to access, free childcare during work hours, job training, and placement services. But Derek quickly realized that money alone wasn't enough. Mothers in crisis needed comprehensive support that addressed the interconnected problems of poverty, isolation, lack of education, unstable housing, limited job opportunities, so the foundation evolved, They added case managers who worked one-on-one with mothers to develop long-term stability plans. They partnered with community colleges to offer free education and training. They created a network of temporary housing for mothers fleeing domestic violence or homelessness. They provided free legal services for custody issues, eviction defense, immigration matters. They offered parenting classes, mental health counseling, addiction recovery support, whatever was needed to help mothers not just survive, but thrive. Within 3 years, the foundation was serving over 800 families annually across 5 Bay Area locations. The success rate was remarkable. 87% of mothers who completed the foundation's full program achieved stable housing and employment within 18 months, and 94% maintained custody of their children throughout and after receiving services. Derek hired Maria Santos, a former client who'd come to the foundation facing eviction and job loss after her husband's death, to be the program director. Maria had received assistance from the foundation, gotten back on her feet, and returned as a volunteer wanting to help other mothers the way she'd been helped. She understood the challenges these families faced because she'd lived them. She knew which programs actually worked and which just looked good on paper. She could connect with clients in ways Derek, for all his good intentions and resources, never could. Maria told him during one of their weekly planning meetings, "You know what makes this foundation different from other charities. We don't judge. We don't make mothers prove they deserve help or jump through endless bureaucratic hoops. We start from the assumption that every mother loves her children and wants what's best for them, and we provide whatever support is needed to make that possible. That's what Margaret needed 40 years ago. Someone to believe in her and help her instead of judging her and making her feel like a failure." Derek nodded, thinking about his mother's shame, the way she'd carried guilt for 4 decades. That's exactly right. My mother thought she was doing the right thing by giving me up. She thought that was what love looked like when you couldn't provide. But maybe if someone had told her that struggling didn't make her a bad mother, that poverty didn't mean she couldn't raise me well, that help was available, maybe things would have been different. Maybe, Maria agreed, or maybe the Whitmores gave you opportunities she truly couldn't have provided even with support. We'll never know, but we can make sure current mothers have choices she didn't have. The foundation became Derek's primary focus, gradually taking precedence over his tech company. He remained CEO technically, but he delegated more operational control to his executive team, spending increasing amounts of his time on foundation work. His colleagues in Silicon Valley found this baffling. Why would a billionaire tech genius waste his talents on charity work that any professional nonprofit manager could handle? Didn't he miss the innovation and disruption and world-changing potential of technology? Derek tried to explain it at a tech conference where he'd been asked to speak about his philanthropic work. For 40 years, I built companies and accumulated wealth and considered myself successful because my net worth kept growing. But I was empty. I had money and status and power, and I was profoundly empty. Then my mother came back into my life for 63 days before she died, and in that brief time she taught me more about what actually matters than I'd learned in 58 years before that. She taught me that people we overlook often carry more wisdom and worth than we'll ever recognize if we don't take time to see them. That success without connection is just accumulation. That the greatest privilege of wealth isn't what you can buy, but what you can do to make other people's lives better. He paused, looking out at the audience of tech executives and investors. I make more impact now with the foundation than I ever did building software. Software is valuable, yes, but helping a single mother keep her children instead of losing them to poverty or the foster system, that's literally saving lives. That's making real difference in the world. That's what my mother's sacrifice and my adoptive parents' love and my own resources were meant to enable. Not another app or platform or disruption, actual human connection and service. The speech was met with polite applause, but also some skepticism. Several attendees approached him afterward, suggesting he was having some kind of midlife crisis, that he'd regret stepping back from technology. That foundation work was fine as a side project, but shouldn't consume his primary attention. Derek smiled and thanked them for their concern, but privately he knew they didn't understand. They were still measuring success the way he used to, in dollars and deals and market dominance. They hadn't yet learned what Margaret had taught him, that none of that actually mattered in the end. Derek's relationship with his children continued to evolve and deepen in the years after Margaret's death. His oldest daughter, Patricia, named her first child Margaret in honor of the grandmother she'd known only briefly. When Derek held his granddaughter for the first time, he felt connected to a chain of love and loss and redemption that stretched back through generations. This baby girl carried the name of the woman who'd given him up and then found him again. She represented hope that broken things could be repaired, that family could survive separation and pain and come back together. Patricia told him while he held the baby, "Grandma Maggie told me something before she died that I think about a lot. She said that love isn't about perfect circumstances or ideal timing. It's about showing up even when you're terrified, even when you think you'll be rejected, even when you don't know if you're doing the right thing. She showed up at your house not knowing if you'd forgive her. You showed up at the hospital not knowing what you'd feel when you saw her. Both of you showed up scared and uncertain, and that's what made it possible for there to be any relationship at all. I want to teach that to my daughter. That courage looks like showing up even when you don't have all the answers." Derek felt tears starting. "Your grandmother would have loved to know you named your daughter after her. She would have been so proud of the woman you've become." "I wish I'd known her longer," Patricia said. "Wish I'd had more than 2 months with her. But I'm grateful for what we did have. Those conversations we had, hearing her stories about your childhood, seeing how you changed because of knowing her, that all matters. Brief doesn't mean less meaningful." Derek thought about that often. Brief doesn't mean less meaningful. 63 days had been enough to transform his understanding of himself, his relationships, his purpose. 63 days had been enough for Margaret to die, knowing her son had forgiven her, that she'd been welcomed back despite everything. Time wasn't the measure of significance. Connection was. He started applying this principle more broadly in his life. Instead of measuring relationships by their duration or consistency, he tried to value each interaction for what it was in the moment. A meaningful conversation with an employee about their family. A genuine moment of connection with a stranger. A phone call with his children where they actually talked instead of just exchanging pleasantries. Each of these moments mattered regardless of how long they lasted or whether they led to anything ongoing. The foundation's impact grew steadily. By its 8th year, they were operating in 12 cities across California, serving over 3,000 families annually. Other states began replicating their model, reaching out for guidance on establishing similar programs. Derek was invited to testify before congressional committees about support systems for single mothers, about early childhood development, about the societal costs of allowing families to fall through systemic cracks. He spoke passionately about his mother's story, using it to illustrate the human reality behind policy debates. "My mother wasn't a statistic. She was a 20-year-old girl who'd lost her parents, gotten pregnant, been abandoned by my father, and had absolutely nowhere to turn for help. The social safety net that exists now, inadequate as it is, didn't exist at all 40 years ago. She made an impossible choice because those were her only options. How many Margaret Williamses are out there right now, facing similar impossible choices because we as a society have decided that supporting struggling mothers is less important than other priorities? How many children are being separated from loving mothers not because the mothers are unfit, but because they're poor? That's a policy failure, not a personal failure. And it's something we can fix if we choose to." His testimony didn't lead to immediate policy changes, but it contributed to shifting conversations, to gradually building political will for better family support systems. Derek learned that systemic change was slow and frustrating and required patience he didn't naturally possess. But he kept at it. kept telling Margaret's story, kept advocating for the mothers who reminded him of her. On the 10th anniversary of Margaret's death, Derek stood before the foundation's staff and board members at their annual gala and gave a speech that summarized everything he'd learned. 10 years ago today, my mother died in my home. Surrounded by family she'd only known for 2 months, it was one of the saddest and most beautiful days of my life. Sad because I was losing her just when I'd found her. Beautiful because she died knowing she was loved, knowing she'd been forgiven, knowing her choice 40 years earlier hadn't destroyed our relationship permanently. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Before Margaret came back into my life, I measured success by net worth and business achievements. I thought being ruthless made me strong. I thought emotional distance protected me from being hurt. I thought people were either useful or irrelevant. I was successful by every conventional measure, and I was profoundly unhappy without even realizing it. Then this old woman showed up at my hospital room on Christmas Eve after I'd fired her for breaking an ornament, and she turned out to be my mother. And in the 63 days before cancer took her from me again, she taught me that everything I'd believed about success was wrong, that the people we overlook often matter most, that vulnerability isn't weakness but courage, that forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible, that love doesn't require perfect circumstances, just showing up. He looked around the room at faces he'd come to know well over the years, clients who'd become volunteers, staff members who'd become friends, board members who'd become partners in this work. This foundation exists because Margaret taught me these things, because she showed me what unconditional love looks like even when it comes too late and lasts too briefly, because she demonstrated that people who've made terrible mistakes can still do beautiful things if they're brave enough to try. Every family we help, every mother who keeps her children, every child who grows up knowing they were wanted and valued, that's Margaret's legacy. That's what her courage made possible. The room erupted in applause, people standing, some crying. Derek felt overwhelmed with gratitude for these people who'd joined him in honoring his mother's memory through service, who understood that this work mattered more than profit or prestige or any conventional measure of success. After the gala, Derek drove to the cemetery where Margaret was buried. He did this often, especially on significant anniversaries or when he needed to think through difficult decisions. He would sit by her grave and talk to her, telling her about the foundation's progress, about his children and grandchildren, about the ways he was still learning the lessons she'd taught him. Tonight he said, "Mom," and it still felt strange but also right to call her that. "I hope you can see what we've built in your name. I hope you know that your story, your choice, your courage to come back, all of it mattered. You thought you'd wasted your life, thought you'd failed at the most important thing a person can do. But you didn't fail. You made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances, and then you found the courage to come back even though you thought I might reject you. That wasn't failure. That was love." He placed flowers on her grave, the same white roses he brought every visit. "I forgive you, Mom. I've told you that before, but I need to keep saying it because I need to believe it's true. I forgive you for leaving me. I forgive you for the 40 years of absence. I forgive you for not telling me who you were when you worked in my house. I even forgive you for breaking that expensive ornament, though honestly that seems ridiculous now compared to everything else." He smiled through tears. "And I hope you forgive me for being the kind of person who would fire an old woman on Christmas Eve over a broken decoration, for treating you as invisible for 6 months when you were dying and desperate to know me, for spending 58 years of my life being someone you wouldn't have been proud of. I'm trying to be better now. I'm trying to be the kind of person who sees people, who values connection over achievement, who uses privilege to serve rather than to accumulate. I'm trying to be worthy of being your son." The cemetery was quiet, just wind in the trees and distant traffic sounds. Derek sat there for a long time, feeling connected to his mother in ways that transcended her physical absence. She'd given him life twice, once at his birth, and again when she came back and taught him how to actually live instead of just accumulate. He thought about the letter she'd written, the one that started everything. He'd read it hundreds of times over the years, knew every word by heart, but one passage in particular stayed with him. "You were a beautiful baby. You're an extraordinary man. And no matter what happens next, I'll die knowing that my son survived and succeeded and built an incredible life for himself." She'd been wrong about one thing. He hadn't built an incredible life for himself. He'd built a successful career and accumulated massive wealth, but that wasn't the same thing. The incredible life came after she returned, after he learned to value people over profit, connection over achievement, service over success. The incredible life was what he was living now, doing work that mattered, maintaining relationships that meant something, using his resources to make actual difference in real people's lives. As Derek drove home from the cemetery, he thought about all the mothers the foundation had helped over the past decade. 3,000 families just this year, 30,000 over 10 years. 30,000 Margaret Williamses who didn't have to make the choice she'd made, who got to keep their children because someone provided the support she'd never received. That was worth more than all the billions he'd made in tech. That was legacy that mattered. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. It was Maria Santos, the Foundation's program director, calling with news. "Derek, I wanted to tell you before you see it in tomorrow's reports. We just got word that the Rodriguez family, remember them from 3 years ago. Their daughter just graduated from Berkeley with a degree in engineering, full scholarship, first in her family to go to college." Her mother called me crying, saying that if we hadn't helped them avoid eviction and get stable housing back then, none of this would have been possible. Derek felt emotion welling up. "That's incredible. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve." "It gets better," Maria continued. "The daughter wants to volunteer with us, wants to work with other families, help them the way we helped hers. She says watching her mother almost lose everything and then recover with our help inspired her to pursue engineering because she wants to solve problems that help people. She's literally who she is because of what we did for her family." Derek had to pull over because tears were making it hard to see. "Thank you for telling me this, Maria. This is what it's all about. This is why we do this work." After hanging up, Derek sat in his car thinking about the ripple effects of compassion, how helping one mother keep her children could change the trajectory of those children's lives, could inspire them to help others, could create cascading effects that spread far beyond the initial intervention. Margaret's choice to come back to him had changed his life, which had led to the foundation, which had helped the Rodriguez family, which had shaped their daughter's path, which would now influence whoever she went on to help. Chain reactions of kindness and connection, rippling outward in ways no one could fully track or measure. He thought about what Margaret had said in one of their last conversations. "I wasted 40 years being ashamed instead of trying to fix what I'd broken. Don't make that mistake, Derek. Don't waste time on regret or fear or protecting yourself from possible pain. Just show up. Just love people. Just do what you can with what you have. That's all any of us can do." That had become Derek's philosophy, the principle that guided his work with the foundation and his relationships with his family. Just show up. Just do what you can. Don't let fear of failure or rejection keep you from trying to connect, to help, to love. Sometimes it wouldn't work out. Sometimes people wouldn't respond the way you hoped. But sometimes they would. And those moments made all the uncertainty worth it. As Derek finally got out of his car and walked toward his house, he saw lights on inside, his daughter's car in the driveway. She must be visiting with baby Margaret. He felt grateful for this life he'd somehow stumbled into after 58 years of getting it wrong. Grateful for the mother who'd loved him enough to let him go and then loved him enough to come back. Grateful for the 63 days that had changed everything. Grateful for the foundation that turned his personal pain into service for others. Grateful for the family he'd rebuilt through choosing connection over protection. He opened the door and heard his granddaughter laughing, his daughter calling out a greeting. He thought about Margaret, How much she would have loved to see this, to know that her name lived on not just in the foundation but in this beautiful baby girl, to see that her son had finally learned how to be part of a family. And he whispered to himself, to her memory, to the universe, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for teaching me what actually matters. Thank you for loving me enough to risk rejection. Thank you for the gift of those 63 days. I'm living the life you wanted for me, not the successful life, but the meaningful one, not the rich life, but the connected one. That's what you gave me. That's your legacy." He went inside to hold his granddaughter and talk to his daughter and be part of the life that Margaret's courage had made possible. Years passed, and the foundation's reach continued to expand beyond what Derek had ever imagined possible. By its 15th anniversary, the Margaret Williams Memorial Foundation was operating in 23 cities across 8 states, with annual budgets exceeding $40 million from a combination of Derek's ongoing personal contributions and donations from thousands of individuals who'd been moved by Margaret's story. But the real measure of success wasn't in dollars or locations. It was in the lives changed, the families kept together, the children who grew up knowing they mattered. The foundation tracked outcomes meticulously. Over 90% of mothers who completed their programs maintained stable housing and employment 5 years later. Over 80% of children in these families performed at or above grade level in school. Over 70% of families reported improved mental health and well-being. The numbers represented real human transformation, real prevention of the kind of heartbreak Margaret had experienced. Derek had stepped down as CEO of Whitmore Technologies years earlier, passing control to his hand-picked successor so he could focus entirely on the foundation. His tech company colleagues thought he was crazy, walking away from billions in potential future earnings. But Derek had learned that enough was enough. He had more money than he could spend in multiple lifetimes. What he didn't have enough of was time, and he wanted to spend whatever time remained doing work that actually mattered to him. He often spoke at events for the foundation, sharing Margaret's story and his own transformation. His talks always ended the same way, with the core message he'd learned from those 63 days. The people we dismiss, the people we overlook, the people we categorize as less important based on their job or their status or their mistakes. Those people often carry wisdom and worth we'll never discover if we don't take time to actually see them. My mother cleaned my house for 6 months while I treated her as invisible furniture. She was dying, desperate to know me, carrying 40 years of grief and love, and I never saw her at all. How many opportunities for connection am I still missing? How many people do I walk past every day without really seeing them? How many Margaret Williamses are out there right now, invisible to those who could help them, overlooked by those who could love them? He would pause, making eye contact with audience members. This isn't just about dramatic reunions or deathbed reconciliations. It's about daily choice to see people as humans instead of functions, to learn their names, ask about their lives, recognize their inherent worth regardless of what they can do for us. That's what Margaret taught me. That's what transformed my life. And that's what we're trying to model through this foundation, treating every mother who comes to us not as a problem to be solved or a statistic to be tracked, but as a complete human being worthy of dignity and support and compassion. One woman who heard him speak, a tech executive named Jennifer who'd attended the same conference where Derek had spoken years earlier about stepping back from technology, approached him afterward. "I heard you talk 7 years ago and I thought you were having a midlife crisis. I thought you were throwing away your potential. I want to apologize for that judgment. And I want to tell you that your story has been haunting me. I've been thinking about the people I overlook, the ways I categorize humans as either useful or irrelevant to my success. I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to end up at 58 looking back on an empty, successful life. What do I do?" Derek smiled. "Start small. Learn the name of the person who cleans your office. Ask the barista how their day is going and actually listen to the answer. Look at people. Really look at them. See them as complete humans with lives as complex as yours. Practice that until it becomes natural instead of forced. Then find a cause you care about and use your resources, time, money, expertise, connections, to serve that cause. Not for tax benefits or networking opportunities, but because it genuinely matters to you. That's how you start building a life of connection instead of just accumulation. Jennifer nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. I'm going to try. I don't want to wait until I'm almost 60 to figure out what actually matters. Derek heard from her 2 years later. She'd left her CEO position at a major tech company to run a nonprofit providing technology education to underserved communities. She'd taken a 90% pay cut and had never been happier. She credited Derek's story, Margaret's courage to come back, as the catalyst for her transformation. Stories like Jennifer's reminded Derek that Margaret's impact extended far beyond the families directly served by the foundation. Her story had inspired thousands of people to reconsider their priorities, to choose connection over achievement, to see the invisible people in their own lives. That ripple effect was impossible to quantify, but perhaps even more significant than the foundation's direct services. Derek's children had all become involved with the foundation in different capacities. His oldest daughter, Patricia, served on the board and chaired the program evaluation committee. His son, Marcus, ran the foundation's job training initiatives, using his business expertise to connect mothers with employment opportunities. His youngest daughter, Angela, managed the foundation's communications, telling stories of the families they served with sensitivity and respect. Having his children work alongside him felt like completing a circle that had been broken when he'd prioritized career over family during their childhoods. They'd grown up with an emotionally distant father who measured his parenting success by the expensive gifts he bought and the prestigious schools he could afford. Now, they were building something together that was about service instead of success, about connection instead of achievement. They were becoming the kind of family Derek wished they'd been all along. On what would have been Margaret's 90th birthday, the foundation held a special ceremony unveiling a new community center in Oakland, just blocks from where Margaret had lived before moving into Derek's home. The center would provide wraparound services for families, childcare, job training, mental health counseling, legal aid, food assistance, all in one location. It was the realization of a dream Derek had been working toward for years, comprehensive support that addressed the interconnected challenges families faced, all delivered with dignity and respect. The building's entrance featured a bronze plaque with Margaret's photograph and a quote from her letter. "You were a beautiful baby. You're an extraordinary man. And no matter what happens next, I'll die knowing that my son survived and succeeded and built an incredible life for himself." Below that, Derek had added his own words. "She taught me that incredible lives aren't measured in dollars but in connection, not in achievement but in service, not in what we accumulate but in what we give." This center honors her memory by serving the mothers who face the same impossible choices she faced, ensuring they have the support she never received. Margaret Williams, beloved mother who came back. At the ceremony, Derek stood before a crowd of hundreds, foundation staff and volunteers, families who'd been helped by their programs, community leaders, donors, media, and spoke about his mother one more time. 90 years ago today, Margaret Ann Chen was born into a world that would not be kind to her. She lost her parents young. She struggled with poverty. She got pregnant and was abandoned. She made an impossible choice that haunted her for 4 decades. By any conventional measure, her life was one of hardship and failure. She died at 78 in my home after knowing me for only 63 days of my adult life, brief, difficult, marked by separation and loss. He paused, emotion making his voice rough. But I'm standing here today telling you that Margaret Williams' life mattered immeasurably, that her courage to come back changed everything, that the 63 days we had together taught me more about what makes a life meaningful than the 58 years before that had taught me. that her story has inspired thousands of people to reconsider their priorities and choose compassion over judgment. That this center and all the work we do here exists because one old woman loved her son enough to risk devastating rejection to tell him the truth before she died. He gestured to the building behind him. This center will serve thousands of families over the coming years. Mothers who are scared and desperate and facing impossible choices will walk through these doors and find support and dignity and hope. Children who might have been separated from loving parents will stay with their families because we provided the resources those families needed. Lives will be changed. Futures will be transformed. Heartbreak will be prevented. All because Margaret Williams had the courage to come back. All because she taught me to see invisible people and value connection and use privilege for service. The crowd applauded, many crying openly. Derek saw his children standing together, saw baby Margaret, now 8 years old, holding her mother's hand, saw foundation staff who'd worked alongside him for over a decade, saw mothers who'd once been clients and were now volunteers giving back. He saw Maria Santos with tears streaming down her face, the woman who'd taken Margaret's story and turned it into systematic programs that actually worked. He saw the community members who'd watched the foundation grow from a wealthy man's pet project into a genuine force for good in their neighborhood. And standing there, surrounded by this community that Margaret's courage had created, Derek felt his mother's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside him. He whispered words only he could hear. "We did it, Mom. We turned your story into something that helps people. We made your suffering mean something. We're preventing other mothers from having to make your impossible choice. This is your legacy. This is what your courage created." The ceremony concluded with a reception where Derek mingled with attendees, listening to their stories, learning their names, seeing them. An elderly woman approached him, moving slowly with a cane, and said, "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Rose Chen. I was Margaret's cousin. We lost touch years ago, but I read about her in the newspaper after she died. I want to thank you for honoring her this way, for not being ashamed of her story. She was a good person who faced terrible circumstances. She deserved to be remembered as more than just the mother who gave up her child." Derek felt overwhelmed. "I didn't know she had any family. I'm so grateful you came. Please, tell me about her. Tell me what she was like before I knew her." Rose smiled through tears. She was bright and funny and so full of hope when she was young. She dreamed of being a teacher, helping children. When your grandparents died, something in her broke. Then when your father left her pregnant, she just couldn't see any way forward. Giving you up destroyed her, absolutely destroyed her. But she thought it was the right thing, the loving thing. She carried that pain for 40 years. I'm glad she found you again before the end. I'm glad she got to know you forgave her. Did you see her after she found me?" Derek asked. "Once," Rose said. "About a month before she died. She was so happy. Derek, happier than I'd seen her in decades. She said you'd given her a place in your home, that you'd introduced her as your mother to your children, that you'd forgiven her. She said she could die in peace knowing her son didn't hate her. That was all she wanted, just to die knowing you didn't hate her." Derek embraced Rose, this stranger who carried pieces of his mother's story he'd never known. She shouldn't have worried. I could never have hated her. She gave me life twice, once at birth and again when she taught me how to actually live. Everything good in my life came from those 63 days with her. They talked for a long time, Rose sharing memories of Margaret's youth, Derek sharing stories of their brief time together. By the end of the conversation, Derek had invited Rose to join the foundation's board, bringing a family connection he'd never known existed. She accepted, saying Margaret would have loved knowing her son and cousin were working together to help families in her name. As the sun set on Margaret's 90th birthday celebration, Derek stood alone for a moment in front of the bronze plaque bearing her image. He touched her photographed face gently and said what he said every time he visited her grave, every time he thought about their story. "Thank you for coming back, Mom. Thank you for being brave enough to risk everything to tell me the truth. Thank you for those 63 days. Thank you for teaching me what matters. I love you. I forgive you. I'm living the life you wanted for me. Not the successful one, but the meaningful one. Rest in peace, knowing your story continues to change lives every single day. And in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the community center that bore his mother's name, Derek Whitmore felt truly wealthy for the first time in his life. Not in dollars, but in purpose. Not in achievement, but in connection. Not in what he'd accumulated, but in what he'd given. Margaret Williams had given him that wealth. She'd come back after 40 years of absence, and in 63 brief days had taught him everything that mattered. That was her legacy. That was her gift. That was her love made visible in the world.